Me realizing my mic isn't plugged in. Also, I have morning voice today, so we'll talk a little bit while we get started and get my voice maybe a little bit warmed up. Otherwise, we're just gonna start sounding like this. You get to make gingerbread in Abyss. Also, you just finished the fanfiction Bones of the Ocean. Interesting. I'm going to take a little bit for the stream to start up, so just so you know. So I hope you guys are comfy vibing for a little bit. I gotta eat, and I also gotta promote myself on some social media. So give me a little bit of time, alright, guys? How are you doing? I hope you guys are doing well. Can you guys hear the music also? I found some nice, cool fantasy music for you guys. Alright. It's vibe time. Yeah, sleep schedules are good, and I'm doing all right. I woke up excited for this, a little unprepared, but I have my ramen right here also, so if you hear me slurping, that's because I'm eating my breakfast, which is a big bowl of ramen. I wanted to get cozy today, so I figured this was a good way to start. Okay, we've got almost all of my social medias are promoted, okay? We're getting there, guys, we're getting there. I figure I'll spend the first few minutes of stream also just, like, chatting around. Rambu Christmas Perch comes out at 1, and your parents said you could get on the get a Christmas hat. That's exciting. Gosh, I haven't made my Christmas list yet. I talked about doing that on stream. I think that would be a good idea. Maybe tomorrow? Okay. We've got one more social media. Okay. We're getting there, folks. I did buy some techno merch. It hasn't come yet. I don't know when it's going to, but I think that adds to the mystery. Okay, wait, one more for Twitter. All right. Okay, I've utilized social media. We'll see if that does anything at all for the stream. But yes, we are live and local. We are here. Welcome to stream. I might as well turn my my camera on now, right? Hold on. Okay. It's camera time, children. Here we go. Welcome to stream. Man, my voice feels like it sounds so different when I haven't been talking all day. This is why I stream in the afternoons. I hope everyone has water ready. If this fic is as sad as they say, then you'll need it. Is the audio volume good for you guys? Can you hear my voice over the music, or should I turn it down a little bit? I'm gonna take another bite of my bowl of ramen here. Oh, somebody who does audiobooks of Dream SMP fanfiction. That's cool. Alright. Sup, Semi? It's 3 a.m. for you? Oh my gosh, dude. Mallory, you should get water. How many times do I have to tell you? Silly Billy. Silly Billy. Ridiculous. Alright. Trying to figure out. I want to do like an intro segment, but I don't know what to say for an intro segment. Oh! Art! There's art! So for this stream, I'm trying to figure out how to set it up so that you guys can see it nicely. But I have talked to some artists about displaying their art on screen while I read. So if I can set up... Yes, I can do it like this. Let's see. Here we go. And then if I move it over here, put it under the Nami thing. Alright. Here we go. So all of the fan art that I'm using today is linked in the description, and all of the art is also like tagged on screen. But I hope you guys enjoy, and you support the artists if you can. It's just some really cool art. I haven't read Passerine, so I don't know what's spoilers and what's not, but I thought it would be nice to have some like cute art to look at in the corner while I'm reading. You're editing, so you might not be the most active in chat. That's okay, we're gonna be reading a fan fiction, so it'll be alright. Anjay! Okay, before we start stream, everyone in chat has to get water. That's the rule. Go, get water, you heathens. I can't believe my chat is out here not drinking water. This is disrespectful at worst, or disrespectful at best. I cannot believe. Alright, I also want to say that we currently have things, going with the fundraiser. If you donate a certain amount of money, let me check how much exactly. If you donate... How much? If you donate $10, if you donate $10, I will read in an accent. So if you want to make me read this fanfiction in an accent, go ahead and donate $10 and you get to pick what accent. It won't be good, but... Hello, Glitter Skeleton! I know, techno is so pretty in this fic. Oh, before I begin and before I forget, I have something for this fic, which is a flower crown because the only correct way to celebrate this flowery fan fiction that I have not read yet is to wear a flower crown. It felt appropriate, I felt like. So we've got our little flower crown on. We've got our water to the side. I've got my late breakfast of ramen. I'll take one more bite of the ramen breakfast here. And then we'll get started with chapter 1, which I am very, very excited for. Warning, you might cry. I'm counting on it. I'm counting on crying. It better be good. I'm so excited, man. I've heard so much just in passing about this fic. Okay. Alright. One more swig of water. Let's go. Okay. I've got to set this up so I can see the fic and chat. Just in case I get a dono. And then let's start the music over from the beginning here. Alright. We're gonna turn down the music just a little bit. Alright. So, Passerine by Blue Jammas, Thixus. I'm assuming it's Theseus, but with C's. The summary is, I understand. You heard the place you loved was in trouble, so you came back. But why didn't you take me? Here it was, at last. Catharsis, or something close to it. I would have hunted them down with you, Philza. The people who did that to your town. I would have given you your vengeance on a silver platter. I would have given you the world. Philza didn't look guilty. He just looked tired. I didn't hunt them down, though. / Or that fic where Techno and Phil are old immortals, and Tommy and Wilbur are decidedly ... not. And yes, no spoilers in chat, please. Technoblade and Philza are immortals. Tommy and Wilbur are not. Angst ensues. Chapter 1. Like a fox to a burrow, like an eagle to an eyrie. Summary. The voices led him to kingdoms and shires and towns. It didn't matter what they offered him in return. The voices didn't demand coin, they demanded blood. He fought for bold men and stupid men, greedy kings and starry-eyed rebels. He fought for armies doomed to fail and dragged them into the light of glory. He had lost count of how many allies he'd fought beside. After a time, their names and faces had faded into the recesses of his hazy memory. And then there was the Angel of Death. Or Eternities and the emperors that ruled them. He must have had a life before this. A mother, a father, a home. Maybe sisters or brothers. But it had been so long. Too long. And now all he knew was this bloody game. His hands knew no other shape than fists curled tightly around a sword, swinging eternally, finding its mark through skin and bone. They all tried to run, of course. They built walls and cowered in corners, but he always found them. Sometimes they begged. Sometimes they chose to jump from cliffs rather than face his reckoning. And sometimes they stared back at him with eyes as empty as his own and welcomed death with open arms. Those were the ones he envied the most. Technoblade never dies, they whispered around campfires and funeral pyres. He prayed that it wasn't true. The voices led him to kingdoms and shires and towns. It didn't matter what they offered him in return. The voices didn't demand coin, they demanded blood. He fought for bold men and stupid men, greedy kings and starry-eyed rebels. He fought for armies doomed to fail and dragged them into the light of glory. He'd lost count of how many allies he'd fought beside. After a time, their names and faces had faded into the recesses of his hazy memory. And then there was the Angel of Death. He was one of the very few people with a reputation that matched Technoblade's. He'd heard of the angel through whispered stories and snatches of tavern gossip. I heard he has obsidian wings, one patron would say to the other over a cup of ale. I heard he once massacred an entire army all by himself. He makes even the green god afraid. Technoblade had begun to imagine a ruthless man, an immortal butcher with the same wretched grin as his. But Philza was not an avenging angel. He was just Philza. They'd met by coincidence, in a land of ice and snow. It was barren, but they'd made quick work of it. Together, first as allies and then as friends. Through it all, Philza had smiled instead of grinned, laughed instead of cackled. On calmer days, they'd while away time with tea and chess, and silent meditations that quieted the screaming in Techno's head, if only for a little while. You know, Techno had said during one of their sparring matches. They had to stay in shape, of course, because peace times never lasted as long as people hoped. The stories never talk about this side of you. Philza had paused, a small, amused smile on his face. Oh, he'd said. What do the stories talk about, then? They call you the Angel of Death. Techno dug in his heels as Philza resumed an onslaught of blows with his dulled sword. They said you leave a path of destruction in your wake that nothing— Ha! Techno parried and went on the offensive. That nothing is sacred to you. Their blades met, they pushed against each other, trying to gain an upper hand, and it was only because they were standing so close that Techno noticed the shift in Philza's eyes, a momentary coldness that was brutal as the blizzard raging outside. It was there and gone in an instant. Light returned, and Philza laughed as he pushed back against Techno's sword. Stories are curious things, Philza said as he swung again, barely giving Techno time to dodge. Some of them are true. He moved so quickly, Techno could do nothing but stand there as Philza rushed him with the hilt to the ribs, knocking Techno backwards onto the training room floor. Techno scrambled to his knees, but Philza was already standing over him with his sword held high above his head, his eyes glimmering with an emotion Techno couldn't place. For once in his immortal life, kneeling there in front of the first person he called friend, Technoblade felt hunted. And then Philza lowered his weapon. He smiled gently down at Techno, the soft smile Techno was used to, and offered Techno a gloved hand. And some of them are not, Philza finished. So, best 2 out of 3? You're a bastard, Techno said playfully, even as the voices screamed, Run, run, run. He took Philza's offered hand and pulled himself up beside the man he was sure could have cut him in two, no matter how dulled the sword's edge was. As Philza patiently moved Techno through all the things he'd done wrong, small things like foot placement and his hilt grip being an inch off, Techno found it equal parts amusing and frightening that despite his eons of bloody fighting, it took only a few minutes of sparring for Philza to find flaws in his technique. But then again, Techno's technique wasn't particularly polished. It only took one brutal swing to fell most people. Something told him that Philza would be harder to kill than that. They conquered nations, he and his golden-haired friend. They were bathed in glory, twin gods shining in the middle of bloody fields. But as their empire grew, so did their enemies. They came in droves, day after day, and before long, Techno had forgotten what peace tasted like. The days were long, and the nights were longer. Every flicker of movement was a spy in the shadows. Every ally was a potential traitor. Every word was a declaration of war. Their home had become a target for 1,000 armies. Through it all, his one constant was Philza. Until he wasn't. Technoblade simply looked up one day from a map detailing enemy lines and realized he'd been talking to empty air. He had no idea how long he'd been alone, sitting in a dusty library with stale tea untouched in the corner. He had no idea if Philza ever said he was leaving, or if he simply went as he arrived, suddenly, swiftly, like a snowstorm. Afterwards, there was hardly any point in maintaining the Empire. The voices were getting bored anyway. They wanted more. A fresh fight, more stories. So Techno took his sword and his shield, and abandoned ship. He'd done it 1,000,000 times before, but the thought of a chessboard lying unused in a crumbling castle made him feel something close to regret. Technoblade wandered around the world, trying to appease the voices. Neither of them were ever satisfied. No matter how much chaos he dealt, there was always more work to be done. So he worked. He had no idea for how long. All he remembered was from that bloody time was a sense of unfulfillment, like a story that had been left unfinished halfway through. Years, decades, maybe more. It hardly mattered. In the end, he knew it would all be the same. The world would end, and he would remain, always fighting, always alone. He didn't know what brought him to the kingdom in the first place. Did he really have to see it for himself? Was it simply to satiate his curiosity? Was he bored? Or did he hear of a kingdom untouched by the wars and petty grudges of his neighbors, keeping its peace and neutrality for a century, take it as a challenge? Whatever it was, when Technoblade stood under the shadow of a gilded castle, watching its flags flutter lazily in the summer breeze, he felt a flicker of a once familiar emotion stir in his heart. There was something about the cobblestone walls and towers rising toward the sky that reminded him of a different palace, somewhere cold and far away. "Hello, stranger," one of the guards at the gates called out. "You sightseeing?" Technoblade paused at the man's cheerful tone. Most of the guards had caught sight of Techno's sword and blood-red cape were quick to draw their weapons, but aside from spears that seemed more decorative than threatening, the guards at the gates didn't seem to be on guard at all. Hubris, the voice said. This is a kingdom of hubris. Perhaps, Techno drawled, indulging the guard. Although I suppose I'm more curious about the inside rather than the outside. Why didn't you just say so? The guard beckoned Techno forwards. This castle is always open for tourists. Just come right in. That was how Techno found himself walking leisurely down the halls of a castle that, under normal circumstances, he would have been storming, blades drawn. The guards did draw the line at his weaponry and made him discard his swords at the door, as if Technoblade needed more than his hands, and sometimes not even those, to wreak havoc. The castle's laxness and security was disproportional to the opulence within. Lush carpet softened Techno's footsteps, elegant tapestries decorated the walls, flowers bloomed from vases as tall as him, and oil paintings in gilded frames. Paintings of solemn landscapes, of wild animals roaming a cultivated garden, of a dark-haired boy astride a white horse, a hint of a smile in the corner of his mouth, and of the king. Technoblade stopped under the painting, nestled beneath the vases of irises. Oh, he thought, that's why. It wasn't hubris making this kingdom think they were protected from everything. It was their king. Rendered in paint and shadow, he looked just as Technoblade remembered, the years leaving no mark on his immortal face. He was standing behind a modest throne, his hand laid gently on the shoulder of a dark-haired woman that must be his queen. In the queen's arms was a golden-haired toddler, sleeping peacefully. On the floor by her feet, with his legs crossed under him, was another child, older, with a gold circlet nestled in his brown curls. Wilby! The child's shrill voice rang down the hall. Technoblade's hands itched instinctively for his sword as he turned from the painting and found himself facing the very same boy from the painting. The prince. He was a tall, lean thing, his face still holding the faint traces of boyhood. He couldn't have been more than 14. In the painting he'd been grinning, forever immortalized in delight. But here he was staring, his dark eyes unnaturally focused, as if Techno was a particularly interesting book he was quietly picking apart in his head. Techno had seen that expression many times in the faces of wizened generals looking over battlefield arrangements. Hello, the prince said cautiously. Technoblade found himself raising his hand in a small wave. Hello. Wilby, wait for me! The first voice called again, closer this time, and heralding the appearance of another child around the bend of the hallway. By his lavish attire and the small army of servants following fretfully after him, this could only be the younger prince, barely more than a babe in the painting, but now a rather loud 6-year-old. The younger prince marched purposely towards his older brother, Wilby, and clung decidedly to his side as they both stared up at Techno. Who are you? The prince said, and he must have intended to be a threatening tone, but he sounded only like he was, a child. A visitor, said Techno, unsure of what he was meant to say now. Have you come to have an audience with our father? The older prince asked in a decidedly more level tone. You can't! The younger prince snapped at once, tightening his hold on his older brother's shirt front. Dad promised today was our day with him. You can just leave now, thank you. Tommy, calm yourself. But Wilbur, Dad said... I know what father said, Tommy. The older prince, Wilbur then, not Wilby. Gods know what Techno would have done and said if the man had truly named his son Wilby, was staring at Techno like a vulture waiting for a dying animal to drop. So, visitor, what is your business here? I have no business, Technoblade said. I am visiting, sightseeing. I'm a traveler. First you were a visitor, and now you are a traveler. A smile tugged at the prince's lips. This exchange would be much easier if we knew your name. Technoblade glanced at the servants lying in the hall behind the princes, clearly in earshot, but dutifully maintaining the illusion of privacy. But if he knew their father at all, he knew that most of those standing guard around his sons would be lethal killers. He just hadn't anticipated the arrival of a god. What would they do if they heard his name? Would any of them recognize it? Would they know what it meant to have him stand before their young princes? How long would they last against him? As he looked down at the two brothers, he found them small. He could crush them under the heel of his boot like ants. But instead, Techno found himself saying, My name is... Technoblade? Technoblade lifted his eyes from the young princes and found himself staring at their father. Philza? Philza stood at the end of the hallway, undoubtedly following the familiar cadence of his sons' voices. He glanced at them now, still standing before Technoblade like an unwitting sheep waiting for slaughter, but Phil's eyes showed no fear. Instead, when he looked back at Techno, he only smiled, his face softening with a familiar relief, the expression of a man after a long, hard-fought war, seeing peace on the horizon at last. "Old friend," said Philza, "it's nice to see you again." "Traitor," the voices clamored. "Traitor, traitor, 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 father!" Wilbur's voice brought them back to reality. This was a different castle, a different time. "Do you know this stranger?" "Well, obviously, Wilbur." Tommy rolled his eyes. "Dad just said his name, didn't he? Technoblade. That's a dumb name." "Tommy!" Philza reprimanded, with no real heat behind his words. He grew closer to them, his steps quiet and even. The servants that had followed the two boys bowed in deference to their liege, despite him wearing no crown. In fact, he looked just as much as a traveler as Techno was, dressed in a simple trousers and shirt, perfect for blending in, perfect for a man on the run. "It's been a long time," Philza said when he reached them, putting a gentle hand on top of Tommy's blonde head. The boy arched towards the touch like a sunflower reacting towards the sun. Reaching towards the sun. Technoblade didn't know if the move was calculated or just a simple act of affection, or, knowing Philza, both. "How have you been?" "How have I been?" Techno repeated numbly, feeling a familiar chill creep into his bones. "Phil, Actually," Philza interrupted before kneeling to look in his boys in the eyes, "Wilbur, take your brother out to the garden for a bit, yeah?" Wilbur pouted, for once looking like a boy his age. "But you said—" "I know what I promised, and I keep my promises, don't I?" Philza ruffled Wilbur's hair, and then Tommy's. "I'll join you in a moment. I just need to have a talk with Technoblade here." Wilbur stared at his father for a long moment, as if weighing the truth of his words, before nodding. He took his brother's hand in his and began leading him away. "Come on, Tommy," he said. "Let's play outside." "Technoblade's still a dumb name," Tommy muttered as they passed him, closely followed by their servants. Wilbur met Technoblade's eyes, just for a moment, before they were gone, down the hall, out of sight, leaving Technoblade alone with the king. Technoblade turned towards Philza, his old friend, and found the smile wiped clean from his face. Philza gestured down the hall. "Walk with me?" Technoblade could only nod and follow Philza. They were quiet as they walked. Techno remembered days like these during their time together, long days of companionable silence as they simply existed together. But there was something different this time. There was an edge. Techno could sense Philza sizing him up, tallying his hidden weapons, calculating his improvements. In turn, Techno mapped his escape routes as Philza led him through the halls, then up a sweeping flight of stairs. He did not want to expect violence from Philza, but he had been expected to left behind either. They reached a balcony overlooking a garden, where most of the flowers and doors undoubtedly came from. Wisteria and ivy grew around marble pillars. Rose bushes and dandelions and carnations bloomed en masse at the foot of elaborate stone statues. At the center of the garden was a weeping willow, its branches providing shade for the two boys chasing each other across the grass. Their laughter echoed through the glade, reaching even Techno and their father high up on the balcony. For a while, the two of them just watched the two princes. Wilbur was obviously faster than Tommy, but he slowed his pace just enough for his little brother to have fun chasing his heels. "They're a handful." Phil's soft tone turned Techno's attention away from the princes. The king was almost smiling, but the hard glint in his eyes didn't disappear. Wilbur was quieter before Tommy was born. A little bookworm holed up in his room all day. But I have a feeling you didn't drop by for silly stories like that. Philza turned toward Techno. "So, go ahead. Let me have it." Techno didn't know what he was meant to feel. He didn't know what he was meant to say. For years, he'd put Philza out of his mind, determined to forget that interlude of peace. He'd let the memories fester like untreated wounds, and now he thought he'd rather die of the infection than acknowledge out loud that it was real, that the pain was there at all. "I didn't mean to drop by," Techno said eventually. "I didn't know this place was yours. I can leave if you—" "No," Philza shook his head. "Don't leave. Truth be told, this reunion was inevitable. Or, I hoped it was." "How long have you been here?" Philza considered. "How long has this kingdom been standing?" "Phil, that's—" "I know. People like us aren't meant to stay in one place for too long." Philza sighed and turned back towards the horizon. He leaned his arms against the wrought iron railings and looked out at the land beyond, the slope of the distant mountains, the kingdom that stretched on and on, unaware that their immortal king was all that stood between them and destruction. "I found a small town when I was traveling, made it something more. I told myself I would leave after a year, then it became 2 years, 3 years, a decade. I did leave eventually, before they figured out why their town mayor never aged, but then I found out the moment I left. Phil's expression turned cold. They were annihilated. I came back and everyone had been burnt to the ground. It was just ashes, everything I built. There were survivors, of course, but they blamed their leader for leaving. Of course, as they should, so I stayed. I built it back up again, from a small, decimated town to what you see today. As far as the people know, leadership has been passed on from one king to another who looks vaguely like him. I'm sure the eldest of them have their rumors, but is it really so bad to be known? Technoblade didn't realize until Philza turned back to look at him that he expected an answer to his question. But all Technoblade could say was, "Is this why you left me behind?" "Techno, I understand. You heard the place you loved was in trouble, so you came back. But why didn't you take me?" Here it was, at last, catharsis, or something close to it. "I would have hunted them down with you, Philza, the people who did that to your town. I would have given you your vengeance on a silver platter. I would have given you the world." Philza didn't look guilty, he just looked tired. "I didn't hunt them down, though." "What?" "The people who burned down my town. I didn't hunt them down as much as I wanted to. They were long gone by the time I arrived, and at that moment, people needed a leader, not a hunter. And I didn't bring you because I didn't know when to be either." They stood there, letting the words to settle in the silence that stretched taut and tauter like a rope around Technoblade's neck. "Deny it," he wanted to shout. "Tell me I'm wrong." Philza did not. "I don't need to hear this from you." Technoblade spat. A well of old hurt and hunger, once dried up, began to fill anew. "Do your sons even know what you are? Who you are? The angel of death, domesticated. What a farce." Philza stiffened. Oh no, I scrolled up. Philza stiffened. "You know not of what you speak." "I once saw you tear a man apart with your bare hands, and now you're telling me about leadership? About kindness?" "I said nothing of kindness. If I had completely renounced my ways, my kingdom would not be what it is today. Domesticated dogs still bite." Philza stepped toward him until they were eye to eye. Despite the accusations Techno hurled at him, despite their bloody history, Techno had never truly seen Philza angry. But he had a feeling that if he kept running down this road head first, he might find himself knowing the full extent of his old friend's wrath. Philza's eyes were hard as flint, one spark away from combustion. Technoblade glanced down at the garden. Phil followed his gaze until they were both staring back at the two boys below, who'd ceased their playing to wonder at their father and the stranger. They couldn't have heard a thing of what Philza or Techno said, but Wilbur stood with his head cocked inquisitively to the side, as if he were turning over the words. "Dad, are you almost finished?" Tommy shouted. "Almost," Philza called back. "I'll be right down, kids." Tommy elbowed Wilbur and said something that made the other boy throw his head back in laughter. Then the two of them took off, back to their games, back to their honeyed childhood. When Technoblade turned to Phil again, the king's expression had turned considerably softer. Techno could live another 1,000 years and still never understand how easily Philza could hide his fury. "I wasn't trying to settle down," Philza said, quietly now, as if he was imploring a child to stop a tantrum. His eyes were still on his sons below. "I was content for a while to watch the kingdom grow, but these mortals and their short, fitful lives, they draw you in, Technoblade. I used to think they were moths drawn to the flame, doomed to catch fire for the most inconsequential things. We've seen their wars, you and I. We've fought them. We both know the things they do to each other." Philza took a hold of the balcony railings as if it was the only thing keeping him from floating away. "But over the years, I've also learned the things that they do for each other. Their lives will always be 1 year, 1 week, 1 day short, but it doesn't seem to matter much to them. They live anyway. They love anyway. Forgive an old god for wanting a piece of that for himself." A late morning breeze passed through, carrying with it the scent of flowers and the shredded remains of Techno's anguish. The fury was still there, and the feeling of a betrayal so grand it might never be abridged, but the exhaustion had begun to settle in. Techno was used to quick brawls and long hunts, but verbal altercation was not something he'd ever trained for, mostly because he'd not cared to speak to anyone that mattered since forever, perhaps. And maybe Philza had been tired, too, of their life before. Always fighting, never safe. And although Techno thought it was only a matter of time before this game of peace was over, he thought maybe he could start to understand why Phil took the chance. It was a foolish move, and Technoblade would scoff at it for the rest of their immortal lives, but it would not be the worst choice anyone had ever made. Technoblade had seen the worst, and this was barely a drop in the ocean of bad decisions. Still, it was stupid. One look at Philza and Technoblade realized he must know it too. "Are they like you?" Techno asked at last, unsure what answer he was waiting for. "Your boys?" Philza sighed. "I would not wish my fate on my worst enemy, least of all my own children." His hands tightened around the railings. "They take after their mother. Mortal. Good in all ways. I thank every god that has ever existed for that. But sometimes..." "Sometimes?" Techno prompted when the silence stretched too long. Philza's jaw clenched. "It's Wilbur. He speaks of voices." "Voices?" Philza met Techno's eyes. A conversation from lifetimes ago replayed in Techno's mind. A moment of vulnerability in a castle not so different from this one, where he had spilled his secrets as easily as he spilled blood. "The voices, Phil. They demand blood." There was a world's worth of agony in Philza's stare, a burden only understood by a parent fearing for a child. "I'm glad he's not like me," Philza said, "but sometimes I fear he's growing more and more like you." Techno's breath hitched in his throat. He resisted the urge to look down again, to search the grass for the boy with the ancient eyes. The voices began to sing. "Not alone," they said. "Not alone, not alone, not alone." "No," Techno said, curling his hands into fists and digging his nails into the flesh until they drew blood, his daily penance. "He is but a child." Techno paused. What was he talking about? What did it matter what Wilbur was? What was this sudden ache in his chest, something telling of a far deeper wound, an older affliction? He did not know this boy. He should not care. He did not care. But then Philza seized him by the wrist, as if he knew Techno was about to take off running, and forced him to meet his tortured gaze. "This is why I had hoped you would come. Truth be told, I was very close to looking for you myself. I cannot do this by myself, Technoblade, as much as I want to. You're the only one." "You want my help," Techno said dully. "My help, after you abandoned me, after you denounced my ways, and called me a monster." Philza flinched. "I would never call you that, my friend." Friend. The word that Technoblade had only truly understood in the days of snow and sweet tea. "I don't owe you anything," Technoblade said quietly. "I don't owe that child anything." "I know. And I have better things to do with my time." "I know. After all you did, I shouldn't even be listening to you right now. I should just leave." "I know, Techno. I know." And then Philza did something Technoblade would never, in 100 or million years, have expected him to do. He kneeled. Philza, once emperor, presently king, angel of death, kneeled before Technoblade, grasping pathetically at his cloak. His golden hair bowed. The voices were a chorus of disgust and disdain. "Oh, how the mighty have fallen." And when Philza spoke again, his voice wavered. "I am sorry, truly, for leaving, but I am asking you, begging you to do this for me, for my son, for the friendship that we once shared, Techno. Please, please, I do not know how much time the gods will give us." "What will you have me do?" Techno demanded, his own voice fraying at the edges. What do you expect from me, Phil?" Philza looked up at him, his face a study in agony. Stay and help as much as you can, and together maybe we can help you as well." The voices paused, just for a moment, just for a breath, as they all considered the weight of Philza's words. And gods, that silence, however brief, however fleeting, was the sweetest thing Technoblade had ever heard. "We can help you." What did that mean, exactly? What would that entail? Technoblade didn't know, and didn't care. He came here in search of a kingdom of peace, and he'd found it. Forgive an old god for wanting a piece of that for himself, Philza had said. And what was peace if not the silence? Was that not freedom at last? So as the voices began to chant anew, an immortal hunter offered an immortal king his hand. The sun climbed higher towards the heart of the sky as Technoblade pulled Philza to his feet, and they were on equal ground once more. He had no idea what he was doing, but there was no true alternative. So Technoblade met his old friend's gaze and said, "All right, you and me, one more time." End of the first chapter! We did it! Yay! First chapter's over. Aww. Let's look at chat. Mallory's drawing. That's awesome. I'm so glad. I hope you guys don't mind the voices I'm doing for them. I could have done the accents, but I felt like that would probably make everything a lot worse just in general, so I'm leaning away from the accents and leaning towards just like my interpretation of their voices. Thank you, Anjay. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I really like it so far. I want to do like check-ins in between chapters where I can like talk about like my opinions and stuff. I like it a lot. It's really cool. The setup is really interesting. I like how true it is to their characters while still being transformative, if that makes sense. I'm also gonna eat some more ramen because I'm hungry. But yes, I really like that a lot. P-Tommy is precious. 6-year-olds. Cry warning for chapter 2. So that's something, like, I was not expecting it to get that intense that early. Like, it wasn't, like, intense, but it was, like, emotional, like, really, really early on. And it was really well written early on, too. That was really unexpected for me. So yeah, that was interesting. Because the fic is, like, long, so I was expecting for it to wait longer to get into, like, the meat of the conflict and stuff, but they just went straight into it. I'm gonna share my link around a few other places real quick, and then we'll jump into the next chapter. I'm really happy with the music I picked too. That ended up well. Here we go. Where else do I want to send it? Here. Alright. Oh yeah, you can send the fan art to me as long as it's not spoilers. As long as it's not spoilers. I don't want spoilers. But yeah, you can send the art to me. Okay. Let's see. Are we ready to start on chapter 2? Are we ready, folks? How are you guys feeling? I'm interested to see where the stream goes from here. I really don't know. Like, I'm interested to see where the fic goes from here, cause like, I don't know. It's interesting. They're like, it's such a cool concept. It's such a unique concept. But yeah, okay. Maybe you could put in the title what chapter you're reading. Oh yes, that's a good call. Yes, I was thinking about doing that actually. Thanks for reminding me. And then when I post it, I'll just post what chapters we're on. Reading Passerine, chapter 2. And then on Twitch, Reading Passerine, chapter 2. Good call, Anjay. Actually. Okay. Here we go. Adding some metadata to my streams like a good streamer does. Deep breath. When Wilbur and Techno and Tommy meet. Ooh, okay. Well, we might as well get started, shan't we? Shouldn't we? Willn't we? Alright, folks. Let's go. This music is so epic. Okay. Pressing the next chapter button. One more bite of ramen to keep me going, and then a drink of water, and then we'll start. I'm not stalling, I promise. Oh dear. Okay. Alright. I'm also gonna put trigger warnings on screen here. Here. So big. Here we go. You just have a unicorn water bottle? That's, you know what? That's Pog. I like unicorns. Unicorns are cool. Okay. Now that that's out of the way, let's go. Chapter 2. Like carry-on bells, the house of Augustus rings. You look at him like you look at me, and I don't know what to make of that. Father's gaze pinned Wilbur to his seat, even more than the soreness of his body did. Even Tommy had fallen quiet, sensing, in the way that younger siblings do, that his brother was in the sort of trouble that required absolute silence. And how do I look at you, Will? Father asked. / or flowers, family, and the futility of trying to outrun fate. Wilbur did not know what to make of the visitor, the traveler, whatever he was. Father had come down to the garden with him, and Wilbur could tell he was sad. He didn't know if the visitor had been the cause, or something else. Someone else. A formal introduction is in order, Father had told Wilbur and Tommy. This is Technoblade, an old friend. He'll be tutoring you for a while, Wilbur. Wilbur had stared up at the man, seeing him in the soft morning light at last. Technoblade. Tommy was right. It was a pretty dumb name, and one Wilbur had heard before, although he wasn't sure where. He was tall and lean, and most likely a few years older than Wilbur. He was dressed like him, too, with poofy sleeves that Tommy had always said made him look like an old man. An emerald earring hung from Technoblade's left ear, similar to the one that Father wore, and a golden chain around his neck, tucked secretly under his dress shirt. Was he some sort of royalty, too? Some foreign prince or a distant cousin that Father never bothered to tell Wilbur about? Father kept many secrets. This may just be one of a million. Technoblade had taken one look at Wilbur, nodded, and then said, "We'll start at dawn," before leaving them. Wilbur had stared after him, perplexed. What? Father had struggled to keep a smile off his face. That's Techno for you. Now they were sitting in the dining hall, each to their own thoughts, except Tommy, whose thoughts must always come out of his mouth, regardless who was or wasn't listening. And Wilbur tripped me, but I got up very quickly. You saw that, didn't you, Dad? Dad, didn't you? I saw, Father said distractedly. He was staring down at his half-eaten plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. Wilbur assumed he was only doing it so he wouldn't be staring at Mother's empty seat. She'd been taking more and more of her meals to their bedroom. Tommy hadn't noticed yet, but Wilbur did. Wilbur always did. And this techno fellow. Oh, and this techno fellow. He's a bit of an odd one, isn't he? Will he be training me too, or will I have to wake up at dawn like Wilbur? Please don't remind me, Tommy, Wilbur grimaced. Tommy stuck out his tongue at him from across the table. It's not like you have any other plans. I'm sure you'll be staying up reading again. He gestured dramatically at himself. I, for one, would love to be under the tutelage of Mr. Technoblade, as stupid as his name may be. The two of them turned to their father, one with starry-eyed expectation, the other with morbid curiosity. Father sighed fondly before ruffling Tommy's hair. Sorry, little bud. Maybe we can find someone else for you. I'm sure the captain would be willing to. But I want the blade, Tommy whined. Wilbur snorted. Yeah, as if you could even wake up early enough. You'll still be in bed by noon. I can see it now. Father gave Wilbur a cheeky grin he only reserved for the eldest son. Tell you what, Tommy, if you can wake up with Wilbur, you can watch him train with Techno. Truly? Tommy kicked back from the table, nearly upsetting Father's glass of wine. Good night, then. Early to bed, early to the prize, as they always say. Who says that? Wilbur said, but Tommy had already gone off, leaving Wilbur with their father and silence. For a while, the only sound were utensils scraping against plates and Wilbur's heartbeat in his ears. He would never admit it to Tommy or anyone, but his relationship with Father was always better with his brother around. It wasn't that Wilbur didn't love his father, or that he thought his father didn't love him. Wilbur couldn't remember it happening, but somewhere along the way of studying warfare and politics, of staring up at the throne that would one day be his, of learning how to be a prince, he'd forgotten how to be a son. And sometimes, when Father thought he couldn't see, Father would look at him with a bottomless grief, like he was mourning something already lost. It should be Tommy, Wilbur had thought. Sunny Tommy, who managed to charm anyone he met, in spite of, or perhaps because of, his loud disposition. Not him. Not when Father looked at him like that. Wilbur swallowed the last of his dinner and was set to go, if not for his father speaking once more. Wilbur? Yes, Father. Father leaned against his hand as he considered Wilbur. Do you want me to be there for you tomorrow? Wilbur scoffed half-heartedly. I'm not a child, Father. Of course, Father said, but Technoblade is still a stranger to you. Wilbur pursed his lips as he thought about his father's words. Do you trust him? Yes, Father replied at once. Wilbur nodded. Then I trust him. Wilbur stared at him for a long minute and then nodded. There was nothing else to say, it seemed, and so Wilbur left, leaving his father to the quiet. Tommy's door was firmly shut by the time Wilbur arrived at their sleeping quarters. Wilbur's own door stood ajar, waiting. Moonlight spilled from the arched windows, painting everything silver. The bed littered with half-finished books, and the desk bearing scars from Wilbur's manifold frustrations in writing music for the guitar that sat discarded on the floor. Mother had given him that guitar for his 10th birthday. He used to play lullabies or spooky songs when he was in the mood for older brother mischief for Tommy, before Tommy decided he was a big man and moved out to the bedroom across the hall. His body felt heavy with thoughts. Technoblade, the boy who looked not much older than him now, tasked at tutoring him at what? Father had not been forthcoming with that, amongst other things. With a sigh, Wilbur grabbed the guitar from the floor and dragged it with him to the window. As he plucked idly at the strings, he gazed out at the horizon beyond the glass, the sprawling lawns of the castle ending at the foreboding gates, and then after that, his kingdom, his birthright. He played a single discordant chord. Nothing had come easily to him recently. Music, literature, conversation, everything all at once had become taxing. Even laughing with his brother felt like a chore. Wilbur's fingers stilled on what was undoubtedly going to be another bad note. Something was moving down on the lawn. He squinted at the figure until it came into sharper focus. Technoblade? Wilbur pressed his face closer to the glass, just to make sure his eyes had not deceived him. There were many people in the kingdom with pink hair, but perhaps fewer who had also moved with the lethal grace of a python. Technoblade walked across the lawn and disappeared past the gates without a glance back. It wasn't until his breath fogged up the window completely that Wilbur realized he was hyperventilating. He pulled away from the glass and stumbled over his guitar on the way to his bed. He pulled the covers over himself as if the darkness would dampen his thoughts. Where is he going? Followed by, will he come back? Will he come back? Will he come back? Will he break. Hi, Frozen! Okay. Next part to read. You're late. Wilbur blinked in the dim sunlight, barely breaking through the horizon. What? He blinked some more until he finally recognized his surroundings. The smooth marble floor, the 4 columns sculpted like gods bearing up the flat roof, ivy falling over the roof's edge like a waterfall, curtaining them off for the rest of the garden. This was the training pavilion, Father's personal training area, where he attempted to teach Wilbur fencing before it became clear that weaponry was not to be Wilbur's forte. It's all right, son, Father had said, carefully tending to the cut on Wilbur's leg from his own rapier. Kings don't really need to know how to fight. That's what armories are for. Father had sounded angry as he said this, but Wilbur somehow knew it was because of him. But you know how, Wilbur had pointed out, dutifully trying to hold back tears as Father applied stinging herbs to his wound. Well, said Father, that's different. Different how? Just different. Father finished tying the bandages around Wilbur's legs and smiled at him. I'll tell you when you're older. He never had. But it wasn't Father standing before Wilbur today. Well, Technoblade said, gesturing to the heavy chest in the corner. We're burning daylight here, little prince. Hurry up. Wilbur blinked again. Sorry, but how did I... Technoblade stared at him quietly as they both waited for Wilbur to finish his sentence. His eyes are red, Wilbur noted distantly, even as he struggled to remember anything else. He could not recall falling asleep or waking up or walking down to meet his new tutor for their first lesson. Well, Technoblade prodded. Wilbur shook his head. Nothing. What are we, learning today? Technoblade cocked his head to the side, unimpressed. His hair had been pulled into a braid so tight that it hurt Wilbur's scalp by proxy. Philza said you were crap at fencing. Wilbur grimaced as he walked over to the chest, kneeling to filter through its contents. That's one way of saying it. He picked up one of the swords and turned to Technoblade, who apparently brought his own weapon, a wicked-looking broadsword with a ruby-encrusted hilt. I'm a bit better at long-ranged weapons, if you were wondering. I wasn't, Technoblade snorted. Get into position. Wilbur did. That's not correct. Wilbur sighed. I told you. Technoblade walked closer to Wilbur until they were eye to eye. Wilbur was a few inches taller than him, he realized, at least until Technoblade knocked him flat on his back with a sudden blow to the stomach. The air left Wilbur's lungs in a rush. He blinked lazily up at the ceiling for a moment before the indignation set in. He leaned himself against his elbows and glared at his tutor, who was looking more and more unimpressed. You could have withstood me if you were in the correct position, Technoblade drawled. You could have warned me, Wilbur spat, climbing to his feet. Oh, is that how a fight goes, your highness? Technoblade mocked. All right then, if it pleases you, your princeliness, I shall be striking your shoulder with the flat of my blade next. What? Quicker than a breath, Technoblade did just that. Wilbur landed on his side, his own weapon flying out of his hands. Technoblade laughed with no real warmth. I even warned you that time and I still knocked you over. Gods, you're pathetic. Wilbur wanted to say, I'm calling my father, but caught himself before he could give that ammunition to the smug bastard. Instead, he got shakily to his feet, his entire body smarting from the impact with the floor, and picked his rapier up from the ground. He got into position again. Technoblade raised one eyebrow. This would go faster if you told me what's wrong with it, Wilbur grumbled. This would go even faster if you didn't fumble your basics, Technoblade retorted. Shut up. Strong demands from a boy who can't even get his left foot placed properly. Wilbur considered his words. He moved his left foot inch by inch, watching Technoblade until the man finally gave a curt nod. Wilbur sighed. See, that wasn't— Oh my god. Wilbur barely had time to throw up his rapier before Technoblade crashed his sword against it. Steel hissed. Wilbur's knees buckled against Technoblade's surprising strength. It felt like having an entire house collapse on him, and if he fell, he'd be crushed. Technoblade fell back, leaving Wilbur with his heart hammering in his chest. What was that? Wilbur demanded. You could have killed me that time. I could have killed you multiple times since you first walked in here. Technoblade gestured for him to get into position. Again. Never let your guard down, your highness. Always assume the enemy is planning to strike. What even is the point of this? Wilbur asked. The kingdom has been at peace for gods know how long. I don't need to risk my neck for a skill that doesn't even matter. Technoblade considered him for a long moment, the silence between them only broken by the beginnings of birdsong as the rest of the world finally began to wake. And what will you do when it does matter? Technoblade asked. It never will. But let's say it will, Technoblade interrupted, taking a step towards Wilbur, his red eyes never once leaving the prince's face. Let's say, hypothetically, that a foreign army attacks at this very moment, and your father isn't here to help. Nobody's here to help. It's just you. Do you just stand there and get torn apart by the mob? Will you run like a coward and leave your kingdom to the wolves? Wilbur flinched. That's not... Or not even an army. Consider, if you will, just one very smart, very angry person, and they've got your brother. Technoblade smirked at whatever expression was on Wilbur's face. That's all it takes, to kill a kingdom. A single person who knows your weak spots. So what you need to do is get rid of them. The weak spots, I mean. The kingdom is only impenetrable because Pilda has long ago gotten rid of every invulnerability. So what happens when you take the throne? That's not true, Wilbur said quietly, standing in the downpour of Technoblade's words. My father, he does have vulnerabilities. He has my mother, Tommy, me. But he has the power to protect them, Technoblade replied, and you don't. That's the difference. The sun had climbed higher into the sky, painting everything in gold. Through the gaps in the ivy, the warm light shone on Wilbur's skin, warming him from the inside out. He imagined the light seeping into his skin, his bones, the cracks of his soul, until he could be made whole again, the boy of sunlight, like Tommy. He wanted the sun to burn away the tiredness, the sadness, the thoughts. He wanted the sun to burn Technoblade, too, with his harsh words made harsher by the truth. Wilbur took a shaky breath, letting their air in and trapping it in his lungs for as long as he could. Then he let it out. He glared at Technoblade, then got into position. Fine, he spat. Do your worst. Wilby, you look like trash, Tommy said brightly over a plate of eggs. Tommy, Father scolded. No, Technoblade mumbled through a mouthful of meat. The boy was right, Phil. Wilby does look like trash. Wilbur groaned at their remarks, and then groaned some more when the movement made his ribs feel like they were cracking apart. Bruises were already starting to form up and down his arms from the various times Technoblade had knocked him to the floor. He couldn't even reach for his utensils without pain lacing up his side, and so his breakfast remained tantalizingly out of reach right in front of him. Tommy's initial annoyance at seeing his brother sleeping in and missing the blade in action was only matched by his absolute delight in seeing his only brother so battered, and exceeded by his excitement when Father invited Technoblade for breakfast to recount how terribly Wilbur had performed. It was to track his progress, or some sort of excuse like that, though Wilbur guessed Father just wanted to stop Technoblade from disappearing wherever he goes off to, like last night. Did he cry? Tommy demanded, practically vibrating off his chair. Technoblade, seated next to him, cut another piece of meat and chewed ponderously on it before answering. Almost. Wicked, Tommy breathed. Father glanced at Wilbur worriedly, taking in his bruises. Techno, maybe next time you can go easy a bit? No, Wilbur said hurriedly, wincing when his sore limbs protested. No, I told him not to hold back. Father raised an eyebrow. I doubt that. No, really, I need this, Father, Wilbur insisted. His legs felt like lead, and some of his bones were definitely misplaced, but by the end of their 5-hour session, he'd learned where to strike to kill and where to strike to incapacitate, how to block attacks as much as deal them, and how to fight off stronger opponents. Which, for you, would be all of them, Technoblade said as he righted Wilbur's grip on his rapier. Let the boy bruise a little, Phil, Technoblade said now, drowning a glass of wine. It's good practice. Good distraction, too. Distraction? Wilbur looked to his father, but he was busy trying to force a bowl of vegetables on Tommy. When he looked again, Wilbur found himself meeting eyes with Technoblade. The other boy was considering him at length. Wilbur had caught sight of that expression multiple times in the past 5 hours, like Technoblade was expecting him. Less with the scrutiny of a teacher, and more with the intense focus of a surgeon trying not to make the wrong cut. What? Wilbur finally asked. Do I have something on my face? Yes. Defeat. Wilbur resisted the urge to stick his tongue out, like Tommy undoubtedly would have done. You are a very rude guest. You are a very weak prince. I don't see what my physical prowess, or lack thereof, Technoblade inserted, has to do with you being such a pissy bastard, Wilbur finished hotly. Wilbur, Father said, swiveling to face his oldest son, cursing. In front of your baby brother, I taught you better manners than that. I am not a baby, Tommy protested, and what does piss— I think that's my cue to go, Technoblade interrupted suddenly, rising from his seat. To where? Father asked. None of your business, actually, Technoblade replied, not flippantly or arrogantly, not just stating a fact. Father's grip tightened infinitesimally on his spoon. I think it is my business, if you're living in my castle. Try and stop me, then. They stared each other down, King and his visitor, red eyes on blue. A moment passed, then another. Father did not move. That's what I thought, Technoblade scoffed, and then disappeared in a whirl of fur and scarlet silk. Wilbur glanced at Father, trying to gauge his reaction. Father had never truly seemed old, but in that moment, it felt like Wilbur was watching him age 1,000 years per second. Who is he, really? Wilbur asked before he could lose a nerve. Father blinked slowly, as if coming out of a dream. An old friend, I told you. From when? He can't be that old of a friend. He's just a teenager. When did you meet him? Wilbur repeated. Father pursed and unpursed his lips like he was trying to swallow something rancid. Why does it matter, Wilbur? Because you look at him like you look at me, and I don't know what to make of that. Father's gaze pinned Wilbur to his seat, even more than the soreness of his body did. Even Tommy had fallen quiet, sensing in the way that younger siblings do that his brother was in the sort of trouble that required absolute silence. And how do I look at you, Will? Father asked. Like I disappoint you. Like I did something to hurt you and you're sad that I can't remember what. It doesn't matter. Wilbur mustered what was left of his strength and rose from his seat. My other non-violent tutors are waiting. If you'll excuse me, Father. Tommy. Tommy stared back at him, wide-eyed. Father only sighed. It's a long story, Wilbur, he said with infinite patience. Wilbur would have preferred if he screamed. And not one you're ready to hear. Either of you, he added, giving Tommy a reassuring smile. But one day I'll... Sure, Wilbur turned from them and began to walk away. One day, whenever that is. He expected a rebuttal, or perhaps wanted one. But, as always, there was nothing left to say. They carried on like that for months more. Every morning, Wilbur would put himself out of bed and head out to the gardens where Technoblade would always be waiting, even after the times he threatened to leave, and the times it looked like he was going to. Technoblade would walk with Wilbur out through his stances and correct them by demonstrating how exactly it could be turned against him. The tutor was never fully pleased, but eventually they made their way through the weapons in the chest and had to request for more to practice with, spears and knives and axes. They never spoke beyond the usual instructions, and Wilbur never complained again when, a few weeks in, he almost disarmed Technoblade during a sparring session with the rapier, before Technoblade inevitably knocked him over again. I almost got you, Wilbur had grinned, even as he picked himself up from the floor. Almost won't cut it on the battlefield, Princeling, Technoblade had said with a roll of his eyes, and I was going easy on you. Whatever helps you sleep at night, Technoblade snorted. I don't sleep. Wilbur was debating whether he'd been joking or not. Eventually, Tommy's jealousy outweighed his drowsiness, and he began to follow Wilbur to the training pavilion, yawning all the way, his blanket wrapped around his shoulders and trailing in the dewy grass. He'd sit on the floor, shouting unhelpful advice and laughing at his brother's failures. Technoblade, the younger prince had said at one point, will you train me alongside Wilbur? Technoblade had eyed Tommy and his blanket, looking so serious that Wilbur thought he might actually be sizing his little brother up. Well, you do have similar skill levels. Hey! Wilbur tossed a straight pebble at Technoblade's head. It bounced harmlessly off his braided hair. I want to be strong like you, Tommy said, uncharacteristically solemn as he stared up at the older boys. And like Dad. He raised his gangly arms up to them. Look at these, Technoblade. They're pulsing with potential. Technoblade arched an eyebrow at him, an amused smile tugging at his lips. Little prince, you are years away yet from needing to learn anything. Your brother's training so you don't have to. Understood? Tommy pouted but nodded. Wilbur stared at him, feeling as if he'd just witnessed the taming of a wild beast. He glanced at Technoblade, who walked over to one corner of the pavilion to stretch. How'd you get Tommy not to scream and kick like he does when he doesn't get what he wants from me? Wilbur called out. I don't kick and scream, Tommy huffed. I let out a manly whine. It's probably because he respects me and not you, Technoblade replied curtly. Wilbur whirled on his brother. Is this true? He demanded with faux hurt. Tommy shrugged. I'd respect you more if you weren't reading all the time. I'm not reading now, Wilbur said, at the same time Technoblade called. I know how to read too, just to put it out there. Afterwards, they would eat breakfast together. Sometimes it would just be Wilbur, Technoblade and Tommy going over the practice session. Technoblade with his dry corrections and Tommy with his enthusiastic, albeit often inaccurate, input. But often Father would join them, and Wilbur would be lying if he said he didn't feel a bit validated whenever Technoblade praised, or as close to the man could get to praise, his improvements in front of his father. Mother had taken to waking late and took her breakfast in her room. They'd visit her there, Wilbur and Tommy, but she'd often be too tired to speak at all. Tommy tried to introduce Technoblade to her once, but she was already asleep again by the time they arrived at her bedchambers. Probably for the best, Technoblade had said. I've been told I don't make great first impressions with mothers, mostly because I met them after I just slaughtered their children. Please reserve the morbid jokes for after Tommy's gone to bed, Technoblade, Wilbur said. What does slaughtered mean? Tommy asked. I tickled them, Technoblade said. Oh. To death. Oh. Wilbur had hit Technoblade on the shoulder, but he was laughing too. 3 months in, Technoblade finally relented to letting Wilbur practice long-range weapons, which turned out not to be his forte after all. The section had to stop after Wilbur almost took Tommy's eyes out with an arrow. Tommy was inconsolable. Please don't tell Father, Wilbur begged as he kneeled in front of his wailing brother, wiping Tommy's cheeks as fast as the ears came. It was an accident, Tommy. Technoblade was cackling, leaning against one of the pavilion's sculpted pillars. You should see your face, he managed to wheeze out between his guffaws. Oh god, this is too hilarious. Wilbur turned to glare at him. You do know, if he tells Father, it means you're in trouble too. Technoblade snorted. I'm not scared of your father. There it was again, the arrogant dismissal, as if Father was nothing to him. Wilbur clenched his jaw to keep the barbed remarks from spilling. Tommy was still wailing, his tiny face turning red from the effort. Okay, Technoblade said after a long moment. That's getting annoying now. Stop. Tommy, stop! Technoblade said more loudly. Tommy stopped, only to wipe his nose on his sleeve, hiccup, and then wail again. What's wrong with him? That usually works, Technoblade grumbled, stalking closer to them with the caution of a hunter approaching a wild animal. Welcome to the world of Big Brotherhood, Wilbur replied bitterly, still wiping gently up Tommy's face. We hope you enjoy your stay, but most likely you will suffer. Technoblade came to kneel beside Wilbur. Tommy, Technoblade demanded, that's very irritating what you're doing. Please quieten down. Tommy responded by crying louder. Oh, for the love of... What will it take for you to shut up? I'll do anything at this point. The crying stopped immediately. Oh, gods. Wilbur put his face in his hands. You're not supposed to say that, Techno. You're never supposed to say that. What? What? Technoblade demanded, panic seeping into his voice for the first time since Wilbur met him. What did I do? What the hell did I do? Tommy sniffled. You said you'll do anything? Realization dawned on Technoblade's face. Well, not anything, per se. Tommy's eyes began to water once more. Okay. Technoblade ran his hands across his face in frustration. Fine. One thing, and you'll shut up forever. I want to braid your hair, Tommy said at once. Technoblade blinked. What? What? Wilbur echoed. You once got me to let you ride me like a pony across the castle, and you asked him to let you braid his hair? Tommy nodded with all the solemnity of the judge announcing someone's death sentence, and Wilbur and Technoblade exchanged glances. Technoblade, one of bewilderment, and Wilbur, one of utmost betrayal. And that was how they found themselves wasting the morning away, sitting together on the damp grass. Wilbur leaned back on his hands and raised his face to the sun, letting the light settle against his skin. He could hear Tommy scurrying around, gathering flowers as the spring breeze blew through the garden. For a moment, all Wilbur could feel was sudden, all-consuming affection. Not for anything in particular, for everything. For the brilliant spinning wheel in the sky, turning everything into burnished gold. For the soft dirt beneath his hands. For the air in his lungs and the pollen on his tongue. For the distant sounds of his brother's footsteps. For the boy sitting beside him that, against all odds, Wilbur found he might actually like beyond mere tolerance. For the levity that he'd started to chase away the more exhausting thoughts. He cracked one eye open and found Technoblade staring at him again with that all-too-serious look. What? Wilbur asked. Can't a man be glad he's not getting tossed around for one morning? Technoblade scoffed. Don't discredit my teaching skills like that. You've been getting tossed around less and less these days. Was that meant to be a compliment? None of my compliments will ever be meant. They will be passive-aggressive at best, openly hostile at worst. Oh, of course. We have to pry positive affirmation from your cold, dead hands. Is that it? Only way to learn it, Technoblade confirmed. They went silent as another breeze blew past them, blowing Technoblade's unbound hair across his face. Then, before Wilbur could think twice about it, he said, What did you mean before when you told Father about our tutoring sessions were a distraction? A distraction from what? Technoblade's expression darkened for a fraction of a second before he schooled it into careful neutrality. He shrugged nonchalantly. Well, growing boy like you're meant to have hobbies beyond whatever you were doing before. I read, Wilbur said, and played music. That was a sufficient distraction, I think. Not according to Philza. Why do you talk like that, by the way? Wilbur shifted to look Technoblade squarely in his eyes. You call the king Philza, which I can excuse because you're, well, you. But Father also calls you an old friend. And I've asked Mother, because Father tells Mother everything, but she'd never heard of you before. And all these things about weapons and warfare. Far too much. You're from a kingdom that has enjoyed peace for decades, Princeling, Technoblade said, with a world's worth of exhaustion in his voice. Beyond those walls, it's different. Knowing war young is not entirely uncommon. Kids just grow faster out there. They have to. Wilbur took fistfuls of grass and threw it at Technoblade's face. Technoblade, unamused, simply blew the grass from his face. Very mature, Your Highness, Technoblade said dryly. You were being all sad again, Wilbur muttered, pulling his knees up to his chin. He looked up just as Tommy came toddling towards them, his arms a burst of color. Yellow alstromerias, white daisies, purple malvas, and freesias the color of Technoblade's hair. Oh gods, Technoblade groaned as Tommy dumped his collection before them proudly. Tommy grinned as he kneeled behind Technoblade. Dad used to braid Mama's hair all the time before she got tired. He taught me how. Technoblade turned towards Wilbur. Should I be worried? Very, Wilbur said sagely. At least he doesn't have scissors this time, he recalled. He added, recalling a particularly incensed butler who'd foolishly offered himself to be Tommy's training dummy last year and ended up with less hair than he bargained for. Tommy turned Technoblade's head away from Wilbur. Hold still, he ordered, beginning to take handfuls of Technoblade's hair, tugging them into place. Ow, Technoblade said, after a particularly harsh pull. Sorry, Tommy said cheerfully and began to braid in earnest. Wilbur sat back and watched them in silence, his ferocious tutor and his even more ferocious younger brother. The sunlight seemed to catch in the tangles of Tommy's hair, making it shine like a golden halo. Wilbur had never seen anyone as focused as Tommy was in that moment, working through Technoblade's hair, pausing only to debate on what flowers should go where. And Technoblade, for his part, did not move at all, or let out so much as a word of complaint, even when Tommy took time to educate them all on what exactly each flower meant. I could write a song about this, Wilbur mused, and then marveled at the thought. It was as if a block he'd been carrying for years had lifted, and his art was now inches away from his hands. If only he'd brought his guitar with him today. Tomorrow, he promised himself, I'll write our song tomorrow. There, Tommy said at last, tying the end of the braid off with a red ribbon Technoblade often used for himself. Wilbur blinked in surprise. Tommy, that's actually good. Really good. Technoblade reached back and ran his hands delicately over the elegant braid and the flowers woven into it. He hummed appreciatively, then caught himself before he could fully smile, because he was still Technoblade after all. Decent, was his only comment. I'm not done yet, Tommy said, and produced one more flower, a single yellow rose. This one's my favorite, he added as he gently tucked the flower behind Technoblade's ear, the one that had the emerald earring that Wilbur found so familiar. Because it means friendship. Technoblade stiffened, his mouth open and closed, like he was trying to breathe but forgot how, before he finally said, Are we friends, then? Tommy stood and brushed grass from his pants. Well, obviously. Obviously? Oh, hey! The sudden excitement in Tommy's tone caught both Technoblade and Wilbur's attention. Oh, sorry. He began waving to someone in the distance, with smiles bright as life itself. It's Dad and Mama! Mother? Wilbur was on his feet at once, his heart hammering in his chest like a moth set aflame. Sure enough, there was Mother, but not out in the sun once more, for the first time in over a year. Wilbur took in a snaky inhale, not daring to breathe again, as if the image before him would dissipate like smoke. Mother, smiling at them as she walked arm in arm with Father through the garden. Tommy ran as fast as his tiny legs could carry him and launched himself into their mother's waiting arms. Wilbur couldn't ignore the brief flash of pain that flickered over his mother's features as she gathered Tommy into a hug, but neither could he help his relief at seeing her walk at all. Well, Technoblade said from behind him, go ahead, then. Wilbur turned to his tutor, and before Technoblade could protest, took him by the wrist and dragged him over to where Mother and Father were waiting. Father's smile was gentle and welcoming, and Wilbur could almost forgive the sadness that remained in his eyes like a ghost hovering at the edges of a celebration. You must be Technoblade, Mother said happily, carrying Tommy in her arms as she addressed the tutor. I do apologize that it has taken us this long to be acquainted, though Phil has been telling me of what you've done for our Wilby. Wilbur expected Technoblade's usual icy jabs, and was quite surprised when he bowed his head in what could pass as deference to an untrained eye. It is a pleasure to meet you, Your Majesty. Your sons have told me much about you. Mother gave Technoblade a conspiratorial grin as she asked, And I trust all they've said is in my favor, yes? Nothing about how sharp my tongue can be when I'm cranky. Oh, I assure you, they've painted you as nothing less than perfect. Technoblade glanced at Father, although Philza might have said a thing or two about your rigid standards for tea. Father chuckled. He pressed closer to Mother and Tommy, keeping an arm around Mother's waist, as if to steady her. As if to hold her together, just a little bit longer. I told you that in confidence, Techno. Technoblade, Mother repeated. That's a rather odd name. I said the same thing, Tommy added brightly, always eager to be a part of the adults' conversation. Technoblade only shrugged, once again demonstrating a level of civility that Wilbur would have never expected from the same man that regularly combated the king's orders. I would feel too much like a traitor if I abandoned it now, after all these years with it. It is my one constant companion, more loyal than most. Loyalty is a rather precious gift, Mother sighed softly. She transferred Tommy to one arm and reached out with the other until she was cupping Technoblade's cheek. I do hope, my boy, she continued, her voice as tranquil as a still lake, that you will find the people you can trust more than your own name. You deserve that, and more, for all you have done for my family. Technoblade blinked slowly at her, for once struck speechless. Tommy giggled. Techno is blushing. I am not, Technoblade spat hotly. Yes, you are, Tommy cooed, leaning back into Mother's arms, safe in the belief that she would never drop him. You so are? Tommy, don't torture the poor child, Mother said, even as she giggled herself. Well, Father reached out and ruffled Wilbur's hair playfully. You look 100 miles away. Wilbur exhaled slowly. I'm just remembering. Remembering what? This. Mother's soft smile. Tommy's cheery laugh. Technoblade's half-hearted protests. Father's hand on his head. Everything. Nothing, Wilbur said. Forget I said anything. He smiled at his father, for once without reservation. He had never felt so light. He was almost a son again. Would you like to watch Techno and I spar? Father's expression softened. Of course. I would be delighted to. It was the last good day. Uh-oh. The knock came at midnight. It dragged Wilbur from the comfort of a dreamless sleep. Wilbur, Technoblade's voice, urgent, almost angry. Wilbur, open the door. Wilbur threw off his covers and bolted for the door. Technoblade stood outside his bedchambers, his red eyes blazing in the dark. He said 3 words that would come to haunt Wilbur until the day he died. It's your mother. They ran through the castle, Wilbur for the first time outpacing his tutor. They arrived at the long hallway that led his parents' bedchambers, already choked with servants. Move, Technoblade demanded, his voice moving over the din. Move, or I will make you. The servants rushed to their sides, clearing a path for Wilbur and Technoblade. Wilbur couldn't register any of their faces or their voices. And all there was silence until the worst sound Wilbur had ever heard, an anguished cry that turned Wilbur's blood cold. Tommy. Tommy's here. He burst into the room and he found his brother curled into a ball by the foot of the bed. The bed where his mother laid, sleeping. No, not sleeping. Not sleeping. Not sleeping. Not sleeping. Wilbur could not breathe. Tommy was still crying, crying for their mother, for their father. Father! Wilbur's eyes scanned the room, but there was no trace of the king, no trace of the man who had just lost his wife. Tommy. Technoblade pushed past Wilbur and into the room. Wilbur could see him, could see it all, but it felt like watching someone else's life happen from leagues under the sea. Everything happened too slowly, too distantly. Technoblade's kneeling by his brother, prying him off the cold floor. Tommy wrapping his arms around Technoblade's neck, burying his head into his shoulder and screaming. Screaming. So loud. So loud. Too loud. Technoblade turning towards Wilbur, handing him something, pressing it to Wilbur's cold fingers. Wilbur looked down at his hands. It was a letter, crumpled, tear-stained. By his own tears, he realized belatedly. Techno. It said, tell the boys I'm sorry, and tell Wilbur he will be a better king than I ever was. The world fell out from under Wilbur's feet, leaving him suspended in the air, free-falling with no true end. No, he thought, or maybe said, or maybe screamed. No, no, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. Oh, said the voices, but this already happened before. Wilbur blinked, and blinked again. Father's gone, he said, not taking his eyes off the letter. He left? Wilbur, Technoblade's voice, rising above Tommy's agonized sobbing. Was that worried in the other boy's voice? I found the letter slipped under my door, and by the time I came here, it was too late. Your mother, she was also gone? The letter began to shake violently. Or, not the letter, Wilbur's hands. But she was just here, this morning. She watched us spar. She was smiling. She was alive, Technoblade. Techno. It was inevitable. Wilbur clamped his hands over his ears. Shut up! This was meant to be. Go away! Wilbur fell to his knees, pressing his hands tighter and tighter to block out the sound. I thought I'd gotten rid of you. You said you were going to leave me alone. A sudden pain laced up Wilbur's arm, and he opened his eyes to find Technoblade kneeling in front of him, his hand an iron gripped around Wilbur's wrist. Tommy was gone. When did that happen? And the silence he left behind was almost as bad as the screaming. Come back to me, Wilbur, Technoblade ordered. What do you hear? You, Wilbur said haltingly. He was not for this act, not for the stage. And the voices. Technoblade nodded, easing his grip on Wilbur's wrist. I can help you. No one can. Wilbur squeezed his eyes shut, but all he could see was his mother's still form. Father's letter. Wilbur, look at me. Wilbur shook his head. I can't. Then listen to me. I can help you, Technoblade repeated firmly, because I have voices too. Wilbur's lungs began to ache with the quickness of his breaths. You do? He sounded like a child seeking comfort from a distant figure. There was too much pain to make room for shame. I do, Technoblade said, so breathe with me until they go away, and we can figure out the next step together. That was all they did. They breathed in and out, in and again. Technoblade's hand on his wrist, and the sickly sweet smell of rotting flowers keeping him rooted to the ground, to the universe. In and out and in again. And in between one breath and the next, Wilbur finally realized where he'd heard the name Technoblade before. Father, Wilbur swallowed down a sob. He told me a story once when I was young. The first time the voices ever talked to me. He told me a story about an immortal god who was doomed to hear voices in his head forever. A blood god. Technoblade, you're a god? Don't worry about that now. His voice is distant but kind. It doesn't matter. But I don't remember how the story ended. Exhaustion was a heavy blanket, weighing him down until he was leaning on Technoblade's shoulder. His throat felt raw, like he'd eaten broken glass. The story has no end, the voices said, but they sounded distant too. Tell me how the story ends, Wilbur begged, even as he felt the last of his consciousness slowly fracture into nothingness. Tell me you'll still be here when I close the book. Wilbur, Technoblade mumbled something too low to hear, and then he said, okay, I'll be here. Wilbur wanted to say more, or perhaps he didn't. Outside, somewhere far away, bells began to toll, chiming his mother's death ballad, heralding his ascension. Tell the boys I'm sorry. His father's voice this time, as quiet as the rest. In between one breath and the next, Wilbur was king. In between one breath and the next, he was asleep. That's the end of chapter 2. Wow. I think, okay. This is, okay. That was, where'd Phil go? Don't tell me in the chat. But, like, where'd Phil go? Why would he leave? That's some coward moves right there. Like, why would he do that? Like... Wow. It's so well written. Like, it's so well written. I'm impressed. But also, I'm sad. I'm so sad. Like... What? What the heck? I think I'll end today's stream here because my throat's starting to hurt and I don't want to like push myself too hard. But that's chapters 1 and 2. Man, that was good. So good. But also like it's going so intense. There are like what, 7 or 8 chapters? Are all of the chapters that intense? How many chapters are there? Yeah, there are 7 chapters. How do you... Wow. Okay, you're fine now. Yeah, okay, we're ending the stream here. I really, really like it. I'm not sure when exactly we'll keep reading it, but we will. Next week I'll read. Probably on an afternoon. We'll pick a day. But, man, what a good fic. Good writing. Yeah, go check out the art if you can. Oh, thanks, Ammo, for the hearts. Hearts, Ammo. I'm doing an event with Ammo later today. I might stream that too, so if I'm live later, check me out. But man, thanks for recommending I read this. I'm really excited to see how it goes. It's really good. Chapter 3 isn't too intense. They're all that intense. Oh no. What's the truth? Oh man. Good fic though. Good content. Send the fan art when it's done. That's good. Just keep getting worse. Oh no, how does it get worse from here? I'm just mad at Philza for leaving. Like, how could he do that to his kids? Like, he knew that his wife was gonna die. It was obvious, but like, you can't just abandon your kids like that, especially not after Techno already had to cope with you leaving. Rude. Philza Minecraft, what happened to you? Oh man. Okay, but yeah, I'll end the stream here. Thanks for watching. Appreciate you guys. I'll pick somebody to raid on Twitch, I guess, with my 2 whole viewers here. But yeah, appreciate you guys. Maybe see you later this afternoon. chapters 4 and 5. Don't tell me that. Okay. Bye guys. Appreciate you.